A demonic spirit from hell suddenly darted around in the crowd, searching for a target. However, all the diners in the restaurant continued to chat and laugh as if they didn't see anything. Strangely enough, the chef named Odd could see everything clearly, but he dared not say a word and had to pretend not to see it. This was because Odd had the ability to see the supernatural since childhood. Not only could he see the dead, but he could also see evil entities that others couldn't, and the spirits did not allow humans to see them. If an evil spirit discovered someone could see it, that person would suffer a mysterious and tragic death, such as a sudden car accident. Therefore, Odd had never told anyone about these spirits and chose to keep a low profile. Working as a regular chef at the restaurant, he also had a beautiful girlfriend, but at this moment, the spirit had already approached her. Odd quietly observed the spirit's every move, but then it suddenly stuck out its tongue, as if trying to kiss Stormy. Seeing this, Odd hurriedly pretended to blow a kiss to Stormy, barely averting a crisis. Unexpectedly, the spirit seemed to notice something odd about Odd and immediately rushed up to him, staring directly at him, as if testing whether Odd could see it. Odd could only pretend he couldn't see anything and remained calm, showing no sign of being disturbed by the spirit. Using his excellent acting skills, he successfully tricked the spirit into believing its test had failed. But the danger wasn't over because whenever a spirit appeared, someone was bound to die. Just as he was saying goodbye to Stormy, the spirit rushed toward her. Just as the spirit was about to drain her life force, a man named Robert suddenly walked in from outside. Immediately catching the spirit's attention, the spirit quickly changed its target and followed closely behind Robert because the more intense a person's negative thoughts, the more they attracted spirits. Only Odd knew that Robert was probably doomed. Soon, more and more spirits flooded into the restaurant, and all of them seemed to have the same target. The spirits knew when death would come, so they all attached themselves to Robert, frantically feeding off the life force of those whose time was near. Odd had never seen so many spirits appear at once before. He suddenly sensed something was wrong because the more spirits there were, the more people would die. No matter where he went, the spirits followed. Robert was definitely not a simple character. He was likely to bring great trouble to the town. Odd's colleague, Bobo, told Odd that he had a terrible dream last night, in which many people died, including himself. Odd was shocked and quickly reassured him not to overthink it. Later, Odd followed Robert all the way to Stormy's ice cream shop. Although Stormy was quite ordinary, she had been a great support to Odd's career, and she did possess a sweet face. The confidence she carried, even in difficult situations, was a rare quality and what truly set her apart. Odd had no extraordinary abilities other than his supernatural vision, which allowed him to communicate with spirits. Though he was righteous and kind, he was often troubled and had a mild-mannered, almost timid nature. Girls rarely found a man like Robert very attractive, but Odd's supernatural ability wasn't a powerful magic skill, nor could he control spirits, which kept him from becoming arrogant. To survive, he had to keep a low profile because his mother also had the supernatural ability to communicate with spirits. However, she didn't hide her abilities, believing they were a gift from God, which resulted in her being sent to a mental institution. Although Odd didn't usually seek out spirits, they often found him. His kind heart sparked a heroic spirit in him. He couldn't ignore the sad gazes of the spirits. Following their guidance, he found the criminals in the real world and exposed their crimes on the spot. He couldn't let those murderers escape, so Odd helped the police solve one murder case after another. He also helped many spirits fulfill their unresolved wishes before passing on, but the police had mixed feelings about him because his pursuits of criminals always caused major damage, and they had to clean up the mess. However, given Odd's repeated achievements, the sheriff helped him conceal his supernatural abilities. Although his girlfriend couldn't see the spirits, she knew Odd had a natural talent for communicating with the supernatural. When Odd told her about his discovery, he saw Robert walking out of the ice cream shop, seemingly unfazed. Odd wanted to see what these spirits were up to, but as Robert left the mall, an unexpected event occurred. A gate to hell suddenly appeared in the mall's lobby. All the spirits entered it, as if they had never been there at all. Odd was shocked. There was definitely something shady about Robert. Odd then followed Robert on his beloved scooter to a mysterious cabin. While Robert was out, Odd picked the lock and sneaked in. He found 3 different brands of cigarette butts in the colorful ashtray, indicating that Robert had other accomplices. The most notable feature was the location of the toilet. But then, a chilling cold suddenly emanated from the room, freezing Odd to the bone, and he almost succumbed to the cold. The coldness slowly receded into the lock, instantly freezing the door handle. Odd, shivering from the cold, cautiously opened the frozen door handle and entered the room. Inside, he found that the pets had all been frozen into ice sculptures, with an eerie chill permeating the air. A strange blue light on the wall caught Odd's attention, and he couldn't help but reach out. The next second, black matter spread like vines, quickly covering the entire room. Realizing the danger, Odd turned and fled as the surroundings suddenly formed an endless black hole, swallowing the entire room into another world. If Odd had been a second slower, he would have been sucked in. He quickly hid behind the door and saw countless spirits rushing out from it. It turned out to be a passage to hell. The opening of the hell gates signaled that a major disaster was imminent. One of the spirits instantly sensed the presence of a living person, causing Odd to hold his breath in fear, avoiding detection just in time. After the last spirit left, Odd re-entered the room and found that the frozen pets had come back to life. Odd then continued his investigation in the house and found many photos of deceased people. This guy was probably a deranged serial killer. While flipping through his calendar, he noticed that the 15th was missing. From various files in the drawer, Odd deduced that Robert was likely planning a terrorist attack the next day. At that moment, Robert's accomplices barged in, and Odd quickly left, reporting everything to the sheriff. Although it sounded far-fetched, Odd's leads were always accurate, and the sheriff trusted him completely. The sheriff soon sent the new officer, Varner, to investigate. Without any concrete evidence, the sheriff also wouldn't allow Odd to arrest anyone at random and encouraged him to relax and go on a date with Stormy. That evening, Odd and his girlfriend went to the church rooftop for a picnic. As they were enjoying their time, Odd saw someone approaching downstairs. It was Robert, angrily storming toward them, looking very fierce. What was going on? Had he discovered that he was being followed? Odd remembered that Robert was a murderer and was terrified. He quickly took Stormy and hid in a room. After everything quieted down, Odd carefully opened the front door and peeked outside. The church was empty, with not a soul in sight. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on Stormy's side of the door. Odd quickly grabbed Stormy and escaped through the back door. Riding off on his scooter, he immediately reported Robert's attack to the sheriff, asking him to go to the church and make the arrest. But when the sheriff and his team arrived, they found the church in complete disarray, with no sign of Robert. Strangely, no fingerprints belonging to Robert were found. Later, the sheriff sent Officer Eccles to question Odd. Eccles had joined at the same time as Varner, so upon meeting, Eccles said, "I know you." During the conversation about Robert, Stormy noticed a tattoo on Eccles' wrist that read Pod. When she asked about its meaning, he avoided the question, acting very mysteriously. Soon, the 15th arrived, and on their way home, Stormy began to worry that Robert might come after them again. As they reassured each other, they suddenly heard a woman scream nearby, signaling that the killings in the town had begun. Late at night, a girl was being chased by two vicious dogs, running for her life. Visibly terrified, the dogs behind her pursued relentlessly, appearing ferocious. Perhaps because the girl was too beautiful, one of the dogs pounced on her, pinning her to the ground and tearing at her furiously. By the time Odd arrived, it was already too late. A grieving man with a gun told them that he had tried to be a hero and save her, but he accidentally shot the girl instead, and this girl happened to be Officer Varner's girlfriend. Soon, the sheriff and his team arrived at the scene, creating a rather awkward situation because the killer appeared more distraught than the victim's boyfriend. Through the investigation, the police found signs indicating that the girl had been kidnapped. It was speculated that she had tried to escape, resulting in being chased down by two vicious dogs. Since Odd had been to Robert's house before, he immediately recognized the dogs as belonging to Robert. Now that they had a crucial clue, the police launched a full-scale manhunt for Robert to bring him to justice. However, Officer Eccles questioned Odd, asking, "Who do you think you are? Why should we believe you?" He even went so far as to baselessly accuse Odd of being the real kidnapper. Fortunately, the sheriff stood by Odd and ordered Eccles to keep an eye on Robert. Odd did not offer much explanation and instead gave the sheriff a charm for protection. Afterward, he dropped Stormy off at her home and decided to investigate the truth on his own. But Stormy wanted him to stay the night, assuring him it wouldn't interfere with his work the next day. Seeing the situation before him, Odd decided to return to his own place. On the way home, however, a faceless spirit suddenly lunged at Odd, screaming for help. Odd turned to run, but more spirits appeared behind him, surrounding him and also shouting for help. It was a terrifying scene. Before Odd could ask what grievances they had, the spirits hoisted him onto their shoulders and started running wildly. Then he heard the sound of gunfire behind him. It turned out that an armed man had appeared, and with each shot, a spirit fell. Within moments, nearly all the spirits had been killed, leaving Odd himself riddled with bullets. The last remaining spirit quickly carried him into a house and laid him on a bed. The next second, Odd suddenly woke up. It had all been just a dream, but the dream left him with lingering fears because his dreams often came true. Odd did not dare to delay. Using his innate ability to communicate with the supernatural, he arrived at a bowling alley, searching for the people who had cried for help in his dream. Sure enough, he discovered that the uniforms worn by the employees there matched those of the spirits in his dream. To find out what might happen next, Odd consulted a colleague, who had also had a nearly identical dream. Odd used his psychic abilities to help her recall the details of her dream. She vaguely saw many flashing lights, a carousel, cheering from a ball game, a large fountain, and blood and corpses everywhere. At that moment, she was startled awake from the chaotic vision, but the clues still weren't enough to pinpoint the location of the massacre. The only thing that could be confirmed was that the town was about to face a horrific and bloody attack. The colleague advised Odd, "We're just ordinary people. Let's just hope to stay safe." Afterward, Odd went upstairs to check on the sleeping child, only to see several spirits hovering around the child. Ordinary people couldn't see them. Odd was terrified but could only pretend not to notice. He suddenly realized that the appearance of so many spirits in town was likely connected to the impending terrorist attack. The disaster might be about to occur nearby, but he didn't know his own trouble was already on the way. When he got home and turned on the light, he found a gun lying on the floor. The bathroom light was also on. As Odd entered the bathroom, a more horrifying sight awaited. There was a body lying in the bathtub, with gunshot wounds on its back. When he turned the body over, he was shocked it was Robert. What was going on? If Robert was dead, who was behind the planned terrorist attack? Was it his accomplice? It seemed that someone was trying to frame Odd and stop him from investigating further. But now, if Odd called the police, they would undoubtedly arrest him for murder, preventing him from stopping the impending disaster. To thwart the killer's scheme, Odd made a bold decision. He took out a sheet, lifted the body onto it, and accidentally noticed the wounds on Robert's chest. When he touched Robert's hand, it was stiff. From the state of rigor mortis, it was clear that Robert hadn't just recently died. Odd suddenly remembered that when the sheriff had searched the church, no fingerprints belonging to Robert had been found, and Robert hadn't been seen in town for a long time. Stormy also mentioned that she had never actually seen Robert herself. Odd finally realized that the figure who had come after him at the church was actually Robert's ghost. But the question remained, why had Robert's ghost angrily pursued him? And who was responsible for his death? Unable to figure it out, Odd decided to dispose of the body first. He secretly placed Robert's body in the trunk of his car and drove out to a remote area late at night. Odd eventually arrived at an abandoned prison and hid the body in a secret corner. After finishing, Odd was about to drive home when he saw countless spirits roaming the town, their numbers chillingly overwhelming. This was a sign that disaster was imminent. If he didn't catch the culprit soon, the consequences would be unthinkable. After shaking off the spirits, Odd decided to seek help from the sheriff immediately. But when he arrived at the sheriff's house, it was surrounded by police cars. It turned out that just moments ago, the doorbell had rung, and when the sheriff opened the door, a mysterious person had shot him multiple times. It was clear that the assailant was Robert's accomplice. Odd rushed to the hospital, startling Officer Varner. Varner told him that the sheriff was still alive and undergoing emergency surgery. At that moment, the sheriff's wife came out of the intensive care unit and thanked Odd. It turned out that the charm Odd had given her husband had successfully deflected 2 bullets, and the third, although it hit, didn't strike any vital organs. Thus, the sheriff had narrowly escaped death. Now, without the sheriff's assistance, Odd had no choice but to shoulder the task of saving the town on his own. He returned to Robert's house in search of new clues. Odd tried to gather information from Robert's computer about his accomplices. Just as he was about to uncover something, there was a noise from the refrigerator. When he opened it, he was horrified to find it filled with cockroaches, containers of teeth, and severed fingers. There were no other useful clues. As Odd prepared to leave, Robert's ghost appeared once again. Fortunately, Odd had a strong mental constitution and wasn't scared. Because the living and the dead were separated, spirits couldn't physically harm the living. Although physical attacks didn't work, Robert could manipulate the house, causing violent tremors. Odd panicked and tried to flee but was struck by a flying television. With a wave of his hand, Robert hurled the refrigerator at Odd. Odd quickly got up and continued running, but the stove came crashing toward him. He jumped to avoid the attack. As he caught his breath, he noticed the gas had started to leak. Realizing the imminent danger, Odd leaped up the window just before a massive explosion rocked the house. In the end, he found no clues and left in disappointment. On the way back, Odd carefully reconsidered Robert's wounds. He suddenly realized he might have overlooked a crucial detail, prompting him to return to the abandoned prison. Examining Robert's now decomposing body, Odd discovered a mysterious tattoo near the wound and emblem reading pod. This reminded him of the tattoo he had seen on Officer Eccles' arm. It seemed Eccles was Robert's accomplice, and the pod tattoo signified being a child of darkness chosen by evil spirits. At last, Odd understood. Unwittingly, he had disrupted Robert's plans, leading his accomplices to kill him and frame Odd for it. Robert had blamed Odd for his death, which was why his ghost had pursued him. The site of the massacre from his colleague's dream was actually the mall where Stormy worked. Odd drove to the mall and found Eccles' police car already there. Odd hurried down to the basement, grabbed a baseball bat, and planned to alert mall security. But when he arrived at the surveillance room, the guard was already unconscious, and a masked man suddenly appeared. Odd quickly hid behind the door and ambushed the intruder with a swing of the bat. When he removed the mask, he was shocked it wasn't Eccles but Officer Varner. Clearly, Varner was also an accomplice, and it seemed they had other partners. Varner's girlfriend had discovered their evil plans, which was why they had kidnapped her earlier. Thinking of this, Odd took Varner's gun and found 3 bullets missing exactly the number fired during the sheriff's attack. This confirmed Varner was behind the shooting. If Odd hadn't rushed to the hospital in time, the sheriff might not have survived. Odd hurried into the mall, searching for the other criminals to save the innocent people inside. But the mall was large. Where would the attackers strike? He spotted a few employees having lunch, a scene identical to his dream. His colleague was also there, and nearby was a carousel, the cheering from a game, and a fountain. But could he stop the attack and save Stormy? In a corner of the mall, a gate to hell suddenly appeared, and countless spirits poured out frantically. They quickly spread throughout the entire mall, searching among the crowd for their targets. The customers nearby, however, were completely unaware, as only Odd's special sight allowed him to witness such a terrifying scene. The appearance of so many spirits at once indicated that a disaster was imminent. Odd felt uneasy but didn't know how to stop the impending catastrophe. Suddenly, a scream erupted from the crowd, causing people to scatter in panic. The spirits growled at Odd like wild beasts, and the entire mall descended into chaos, with the crowd rushing madly toward the exits. Only Odd moved against the flow, weaving through the panicked masses because his girlfriend was still working in the mall. When the crowd reached the exits, they found the mall doors had already been locked, and the frightened customers banged on the doors in a frenzy. Odd continued to push his way inside. At that moment, gunshots rang out. Odd finally saw a gunman with an assault rifle firing indiscriminately at those around him. His girlfriend was within the shooter's range. To protect Stormy, he took advantage of a moment when the shooter was reloading, drew his gun, and charged toward him without hesitation. However, Odd's shooting skills were terrible, and each bullet missed the target. Before he could fire his last shot, countless spirits swarmed around him, frantically trying to block his path. It was evident that the spirits wanted the disaster to occur. The shooter quickly finished reloading and was about to raise his weapon when Odd, with all his strength, broke through the blockade and reached the shooter, shooting him directly. The great disaster was averted. Odd then dropped the gun and staggered toward the store that had been shot up, his heart filled with fear and anxiety as he saw the place riddled with bullet holes. Grief and terror intertwined in that moment. He thought Stormy had been killed by the gunman. Luckily, Stormy was unharmed and stood up from behind the counter, much to Odd's relief. As Odd moved to embrace Stormy, he sensed something. He turned and saw a lingering spirit in the mall, Varner's girlfriend's ghost, desperately waving at him. Odd realized that the danger wasn't over. He restrained his impulse to hug Stormy and instead pulled off the shooter's mask. The man wasn't Officer Eccles but rather the person who had accidentally killed his girlfriend. Unexpectedly, he was also an accomplice. This meant that Eccles was planning another attack, and Odd had to find a way to stop it. Following the guidance of Varner's girlfriend's spirit, Odd arrived at the underground parking lot. She provided him with one last clue before vanishing in front of a truck. When Odd opened the truck's cargo hold, he discovered it was filled with explosives, set to detonate in less than 3 minutes. Their plan had been to destroy the entire mall, and the spirits were the masterminds behind this disaster. As Odd was trying to figure out how to deal with the explosives, a spirit possessed the last remaining gunman. Eccles, now controlled by the spirit, knew Odd was trying to stop the explosion and immediately raised his gun to start shooting. Odd quickly shut the cargo door but couldn't avoid getting hit by a bullet. Enduring the intense pain, he climbed into the truck, started it up, and drove straight out of the parking lot, disregarding Eccles' attempts to stop him. With only 43 seconds remaining until detonation, Odd had to get the truck out to the countryside, but to Odd's surprise, Eccles didn't give up. He gripped the truck's door and climbed up to the window, aiming directly at Odd's head. Fortunately, Odd's reflexes were quick enough to dodge the fatal shot, though the bullet grazed his scalp. Infuriated by his failed ambush, Eccles struggled to climb into the driver's seat. With just 16 seconds left on the clock, Eccles excitedly reached the passenger seat. Odd opened the door on the opposite side and jumped out of the truck without hesitation. Eccles, controlled by the spirit, was completely dumbfounded. The next moment, the truck crashed into the roadside guardrail and plunged into a dry ditch, followed by a massive explosion. Eccles and the spirit perished in the flames, and the disaster was finally over. Odd had single-handedly saved hundreds of people in the town before collapsing from exhaustion. When Odd woke up in the hospital, Stormy was by his side. Because Odd had saved the town, he was rightfully hailed as a hero, and both he and Stormy were adored by the community. But Odd didn't care for any of that. Wanting his own space, he and Stormy stayed cooped up in their little house, enjoying their time together and hardly ever separating. Then, one day, the sheriff knocked on the door and said something strange. "You can't go on like this," he said, which made Odd think the sheriff had more to add. But the sheriff continued, "It's time to let her go. You need to face reality." Odd's expression grew heavy as he turned to look at Stormy behind him, noticing bloodstains on her. It turned out that Stormy had died in the shooting incident that day. When she stood up from behind the counter, she was already a spirit. Ghosts couldn't speak, so since standing up from behind the counter, Stormy hadn't uttered a single word. The one who had been by Odd's side these past days was her spirit. Unable to pass on, Odd had been deceiving himself, unwilling to wake up and accept that she was gone. But time would mercilessly tear down those illusions, thrusting you back into reality over and over, reminding you that she had left, and you had to move forward alone. Odd wept, unable to accept the reality. He had risked his life to save everyone but failed to save the one he loved most. Stormy. He clung to Stormy, whom only he could see. He didn't desire wealth or to be a superhero. He just wanted to protect his simple love. But realizing that Stormy couldn't stay in this world forever and needed to reincarnate, Odd had no choice but to let go. As he watched Stormy walk slowly out the window, her spirit transformed into butterflies, disappearing into the wind. Years later, to prolong his life and wait for Stormy to be reborn, Odd left the town. He needed to wait 60 years before he could meet Stormy again. It would be a long wait, but Odd was a patient man, and there were still many people waiting for him to save. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.